Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Dr. Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and it is an honor and a privilege to be with you this evening for a conversation that is entitled Dear Dad. And we are really excited to invite you in. So we hope that folks are logging in right now and beginning to kind of pull up to your computer screens tonight to have a conversation at the intersection of Black fatherhood, Black parenting, and the birthing experience. We believe, and the argument for this evening is that Black dads and dads in general, and all of the shapes and sizes that they come in, are important and critical to the birthing experience. However, we are not talked about enough. We are not integrated into the conversation, and often we are missing from a critical analysis of not only from that very first moment, but across the whole trajectory of Black parenthood, Black families, and particularly Black fatherhood. And so I'm excited to be with you this evening. We're going to talk. I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion. And we're going to have an opportunity to really think about how have Black men had to deal with and think about the history of birthing, how they navigate these systems, and what are the current issues, problems, and concerns that they are facing as they move forward. And so I would like to thank Birthing the Magic for inviting me. I would like to thank all of the folks that are joining tonight and folks that are going to be logging on in the next couple of minutes. We're excited to be here. Again, I am Joseph Tucker Edmonds. I am a professor of religious studies and African American studies at Indiana University in Indianapolis. A lot of my work looks at the role of religion and spirituality and the body and how it relates to wellness and wholeness, especially for Black men and Black men in their relationship to the larger and the broader world. So I'm excited to come in. I joined this collective and collaborative last year to talk about and think about Black fatherhood and Black belonging. And when I was asked to come back this year, it was without any doubt or reservation. I jumped right on and said, let's do it. Let's do something powerful and magic for Black men, for Black families, and just for thinking critically, historically, and creatively about the possibility of fatherhood and particularly Black fatherhood. So hopefully you all are ready to jump in and to get involved and to talk about this topic tonight. I wanted to open up really quickly and I wanted to kind of set the stage for you all because I think that when we're talking about Black men and fathers and the birthing experience, oftentimes I think we fast forward to the current moment. And the current moment has men and doulas and family members and mama and big mama and them, everybody in the delivery room, everybody participating in the magic of bringing this new life into our family and into our community. And oftentimes it is an amazing spiritual, uh, uh, transformative experience. However, we know, and I know as a person that studies history and thinks about this, that the idea of men or even other people being in the delivery room is a relatively new phenomenon, right? I often tell folks that when we're thinking about men being in the delivery room, it wasn't really until the early 1930s, 1940s that you even had most women having their babies or having their children in hospitals or medical establishments, right? So we're less than 100 years from most women, and especially most Black women, having their babies in a hospital or a medical scenario, right? So that's 1930s, 1940s. It isn't until the late 1960s, 1970s that men are even really allowed into the birthing or the laboring room, as they used to call it, where men were allowed to be in the room while women labored and were beginning to move into the delivery process. But even at that early stage, men were kicked out or were asked to leave, right? at the time that women were about to move into to the final stages of delivery. So it wasn't until really the last night to the 1970s, and during the women's right movement, as women were being begun to ask who they wanted in the room with them, how we could make a better birthing experience for them, that they were invited into, that men and other folks were invited into not only the laboring room, but into that delivery space, right? And and even though men were invited in, recent studies show us that we really have not done a good job of asking men, particularly Black men, how they feel when they enter into those spaces, right? If you look at some of the most recent studies around men in delivery rooms, the data suggests that close to 80% of the fathers or 85% of the mothers and 70% of all of the relationships tend to say that men and family members being in the delivery room make it beneficial, make it help to facilitate the delivery, reduce the anxiety of mom, and things of that nature. However, and this is where I want to get to for all of the men and the caregivers that are joining into the room right now, what we continue to find out that even though over 90% of men who are involved and are in the delivery room and are present at birth say that they felt happy, 30% or 36% still felt fear, 23% still felt helpless, and close to 15% were overwhelmed by the situation. So even though we're only 50 to 60 years into the history of men even being into the delivery room, we haven't really unpacked the emotions, all of the real trauma and excitement of men being in the delivery room. And I'm all for saying we've got to foreground mom and we've got to put mom at the front of this conversation. But at the same time, we are recognizing very early on that men are dealing with the physical, spiritual, economic, political and cultural realities of being in that delivery room, and that there are often not resources to support them as they are supporting mom, as they are bringing into this world or helping to bring into this world this new life. And so, one of the things that we want to talk about today is to say, hey, dad, or dear dad, or what's up, my brother. Like, we want to say to each and every one of you that those feelings are real. Those feelings are important, that those feelings are shared by many men who have experienced the birthing experience, feeling helpless, feeling fear, feeling overwhelmed and anxiety are realities of the birthing situation that so many men and Black men are experiencing, right? And I want to put a bracket on that just for a moment, right? And say, this is where we start, right? This is where we begin to think about the larger issues and the constraints of, like, how are we talking to dad about those emotions, about those anxieties, at the same time while we're talking about the immense joy and excitement that it brings, right? So I wanted to kind of place that there. Black men and men in general being in the birthing room is relatively new. But secondly, I wanted to kind of bring to the table this notion, and I want to ask y'all to think alongside with me as we think about this idea that not only is are Black men and men a relatively new phenomenon in this birthing space, but we've also got to bring in the questions of race and class, my brothers. And so one of the things that we're talking about tonight is not only about what does it mean to bring your whole male body, your whole experience of fatherhood and partnering and daddyhood into this place, into this space, but it's also what does it mean to bring it in as a racialized being who has often not had the most amazing experiences in the hospital system. So what does it mean to not only be dad in that delivery room, but to be a Black dad in that delivery room, to deal with the messaging that you don't belong, to deal with the messaging that you're not expected to be there, to deal with the messaging or the anxieties that these are medical systems that we can't trust, right? That mom is going to be hurt or not helped, or that baby is going to be hurt or not helped, right? And so all of this combined, right? Being dad and all of your real authentic emotions, but also being Black dad and all of the racial and political consequences that that carries with it, and beginning to ask the question, what do we do with that? And so as we start off, I want everybody in this space with me just to like take a breath and to experience with me that you are doing and have done, and you are continuing to be more than enough as a dad, as a provider, as a supporter in this birthing process. And what we want to do tonight is not to demonize, first of all, not to tell you that there's some perfect set of solutions out there that's going to make it easier for the next time or what you should have done the last time. But what we want to do tonight is to create a space where your emotions, where your experiences, where your time as a dad in and outside of that birthing room are validated, and that we can think together about possibilities of supporting and networking with other brothers and with other men as they navigate this experience, right? Again, the goal here is to lift those kinds of ideas up. And I want to lift up the joy as well as the pain. I want to lift unknowns as well as the things that we have really kind of completely conquered and we feel like we know pretty well. And I want us to just have a chance to share, to talk, to engage. So I want to tell you all, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A feature as we are going along. If you want to come on and talk and share part of your narrative, we'll figure out a way for that to happen as well. But I wanted to kind of open it up for us to think about that, right? So the first thing that I wanted to talk about for you all is I want to expand the definition of dad and fatherhood. We know that in most communities, but specifically in the Black and diasporic communities, that dad and mom, auntie and uncle, cousin is a term that not only is shaped by biological connection, but it is shaped by a lot of different relationships that are unpacked and aligned to support mom and to support that baby that is coming into the world. So when we're talking about dear dad tonight, we're talking about granddads that show up. We're talking about uncles that support their nieces, or we're talking about brothers that show up and support their sisters and their siblings, right? We're talking about friends and other male figures that are showing up to be a part of that birthing process. So this is, on one level, we are talking to the bio dad, or we're talking to the partner who is in the room, but we are also talking to all of those other men who support and provide the foundation for this birthing mom or this birthing person, and providing support, sometimes being in the room, sometimes waiting in the lobby, sometimes taking her to the prenatal care visits, right? So I want to be expansive, if you will. Right? Let's go large in what does it mean, who we're talking to when we say dear dad. I'm talking to all of y'all, everybody that shows up, that is coming out to support this process and to support this mom, right? And so I want to first say that. Secondly, I want to say that when we are talking about and to dad today, I want to talk about the ways in which we are open to the broad range of emotions that comes along with participating and joining in this process, right? So let's be real, fellas, right? The moment your partner or your sister or your cousin or whoever you are in this relationship with comes to you and says, hey, I'm about to have a baby. Hey, I'm about to enter into this. There is a degree of, anxiety, and I think a positive anxiety about what role can I play? What role should I play to support this woman, to mitigate or lessen any negative outcomes, and to involve myself in ways that feel authentic to me and the world that I am trying to create for this child that's going to come in, right? And so I think that the first thing that we want to talk about tonight is how have we been set up to support mom, right? And to support the birthing person. And number one, I think that has to deal with how we are allowed to be involved in all aspects of the birthing process, right? And like I was telling you, it's relatively new for men to be in the delivery room. It's relatively new for men to participate in Lamaze classes or, prenatal visits. So one of the things that we are learning in terms of the research is that when men show up in both the prenatal setting, in Lamaze and the preparatory settings, and also in the birthing and the delivery room setting, that this lessens anxiety for mom, that this increases the possibility of a vaginal birth. It decreases the possibility of preterm births, right? So dad's presence is essential and important. And so one of the things that we've got to figure out is how do we let hospital systems, institutions, and structures know that we want to be there, right? That's number one. Number two is once they know that we want to be there, how do we create a system where they acknowledge us, right? And when I say acknowledge, this is not meaning for us to step on mom or to get in the way of the medical setting, but it is an opportunity for us to ask questions that mom might not remember to ask, for us to think about other things that we might be able to provide, for us to develop and create settings around that. And so one of the things that we're saying today to healthcare providers and to healthcare institutions is to make space for dad in all of these settings, right? To ask dad, how is he doing? Ask dad, how is he managing the anxiety? Ask mom and dad, how have they developed communication protocols and patterns so that they can both deliberate and figure out ways to engage and to support this larger system, right? So number one is how can dad show up, right? So that's number one. Number two, and I'm about to get to, I want to bring you all in, is how do we think about and do we think about and manage dad's emotions, right? And so one of the things that I want us to be able to say tonight is, and I want y'all to, put in to the chat or think about in your mind just for the next moment, like what was the first emotion that you felt when your partner, when your family member, when your sister, your daughter, your wife told you that they were pregnant? What was that first emotion? I'm gonna give you a second to think about that. What was the first emotion? Oftentimes, that's an emotion of joy and excitement. That is emotion of a number of things that tend to be maybe gesture towards the positive. But I want us to now say, I want to give you now 10 more seconds. What was the second emotion? And I want us to be honest. What was that second emotion, right? If that first one was joy, if that first one was a hug, if that first one was tears because you all had been trying for a while, or that was tears, exactly. I thank you. I appreciate that. That second emotion, Patrice, is nerves, it's fear. It's the question I remember, it's the question about how much is this gonna cost, right? Do we have enough room in the house? Do I know how to do the thing that I in my mind imagine for a dad to be able to do, right? All of those emotions and fears begin to percolate. And I'm looking at the chat and I'm looking at you. Thank you, right? All of that begins to kind of percolate. Nerves, fear, anxiety. And what I wanted to say today is that while we're asking the hospital systems to acknowledge us, that's number one, right? And to say, hey, dad, come in. Hey, dad, how are you doing? Hey, dad, how are you and mom doing, right? We also got to acknowledge these emotions and these questions that are percolating up for dad, right? Joy, then there's thank you, Dwayne, right? Like this idea, like we go from joy and excitement to like, hey, I got to do this. I got to put this out there and I got to make this happen, right? And I want us to say tonight, hey, the nervousness is real, the anxiety is real. What and how do we manage that, right? And then I think that many of us, because of how masculinity is constructed in the world, we're told to run away from the emotion, right? We're told to not sit in it, or we're told that it's not masculine enough. And so the thing that we often do when we are confronted with emotions like fear, like nervousness, like anxiety, like just baseline confusion, is that we begin to articulate like tasks and plans that we want to put into action. And that's not always bad, right? You need a plan. You need to pack the bag. You need to know what mom needs. You need to kind of make sure those kinds of things are happening. But we often do that outside of really taking time to attend to the real nerves, anxieties, and emotions that are percolating. And so I want us today to take some time to think about how can we effectively and positively respond to those emotions, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about y'all with this because I think this is really important because there's data out there about men and postpartum depression that we haven't talked about. There's data out there about men and anxiety during the birthing process that we can kind of unpack, right? So one is we've got to be acknowledged, right? That's number one. Number two, we've got to, be real and beckon and come close to our emotions. And then the third one is that we've got to really figure out how we are now going to orient ourselves to this to the world and the system in and within our new role as father, right? Or our additional role as father. So because I think that like I tell people all the time that a dad of one is very different than a dad of two, right? There's a different level of nervousness when when mama comes in and says, I'm having another baby or the third baby, right? There's a different economic responsibility with the third or the fourth, right? There is new issues when you have a child that maybe emerges with some disability or some issues during pregnancy, right? These are all happening that we have to address and encourage, right? So on one level, we got to be acknowledged. The second one, we've got to deal with and beckon to our emotions. And the third is that we've got to call the community and we got to really begin to think about how we are now going to develop a real a mechanism to articulate and to navigate the world as dad or as dad of two or as dad of three or as dad of four. I know I'm sure there's some folks on here tonight that maybe have more kids than I can count up to right now, but you know what I'm trying to get at, right? That there is this necessity to like reorient and restructure our lives, right? And so I wanted to kind of like take that for a moment and ask you all, I wanted to think about how and why I think that we got to think about this critically for dad and for mom, especially given the fact that when Black families walk into the hospital, they are walking into something unique. Everybody understands that with me, right? And all of you all on this call, or many of you all on this call, know the data about Black women and maternal mortality, that, that we die 3 and 4 times, or Black women die 3 or 4 times the rate of white women and Latinx women in during childbirth, that Black babies are dying at a higher number than any other racial group in the country, right? That the preterm birth, and that's just the definition of births that are emerging between 35 weeks or 36 weeks and earlier, right? That Black families experience preterm births and complications at much higher rates than anybody else in the hospital system. And so the burden on the Black man who is showing up with his family, right? This Black father, this dad that is walking in, the burden to not only manage being acknowledged, hey, I'm here, dealing with your emotions, right? Hey, I have some joy and nervousness, and being able to then prepare for a world where you can kind of articulate a model of fatherhood that is meaningful for you. You now have to do that all under the umbrella of less than ideal outcomes for Black moms and for Black babies, right? That you've got to be able to manage anxiety, given that we know that Black women are not listened to oftentimes when they're in prenatal care or the birthing room. We've got to deal with anxiety that Black babies are coming out and having additional issues because doctors are not giving the kind of care or attention to them and their mothers during prenatal visits and prenatal concerns. We've got to deal with the issues that oftentimes, even if doctors are doing a good job of attending to Black babies and Black moms, sometimes the other support staff in the hospital are not, right? And so all of this leads to dad having to take on or having to manage another set of emotions, if you will. And the research that I do calls this racial or cultural trauma, right? It's both the historical memory of it, right? And the current experience of it, right? So the historical memory of it is that we've heard the stories, we've seen the news, we've experienced the different things, and all of that plays out in a particular way. And so we are trying to figure out how to manage not only access, not only our emotions, and not only, like I think one of the folks in the chat room said, and I love it, not only a model of dadship, but we also have to manage racial and cultural trauma that is historically as well as in the contemporary moment felt by folks. So I want to invite in, I see that my brother David Johnson is here, and he is going to help facilitate the questions and the comments from you all. And I want to, move into just the broader conversation, David. I've been talking to the folks just a little bit about, kind of all the what is the background for dad. And one of the things that we've kind of centered is that dad is new in the hospital room, right? This is a relatively new phenomenon the last 50 years for all dads, not just, and that dad has not often or not always been able to center his emotions in a way for him to be radically present for mom and for himself. And then the third point is that this is all happening under the cloud of racial and cultural trauma.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, girl. I feel like I'm.
I think you might be muted.
Marie, you're unmuted. Marie?
So, hello, everybody.
It says
Sorry,
you're muted on here.
Marie, if you could
Yeah,
mute.
Marie, you are unmuted.
Oh,
All right. So,
good.
Dr. Tucker Edmonds, thank you so much. Everybody, first, my apologies. My calendar showed
Still shows you as muted.
Good.
What else, the grandbabies?
Hold
Oh,
on 1 second. Let's get Marie muted. Apologies,
Yeah.
all.
I'm gonna see if we can mute her.
So while we do that,
you're not using your phone?
extreme apologies, but
Me now.
as we dive in, we really do need to mute her.
Turn the volume down on your phone. Let's try that. And then you might not get any feedback.
Who's the host?
Hey, Susan.
Hey,
Okay,
Marie, we can hear you. Okay, we need to mute Marie.
okay.
Your volume is still turned up on your
Okay.
phone.
There we go. Oh, no.
So we're getting
Yeah,
there.
Marie, you need to mute. Okay.
So,
Can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey.
Yay. I hope I didn't. I was trying to make sure that I didn't affect the Zoom call that I also have going on. I don't like that Zoom. I guess that's so that you can't. Again, it's still there. Okay.
You're in our.
Then nice to meet you.
Oh, Marie, we can. You're on our Zoom, Marie.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all right. If you wanna. Okay,
Okay, there she is. Go ahead.
so here we go. Thank you for taking the lead. Everyone who's here, I would just share with you very quickly. I am a father of two young men. And for all of us, whether we are dads, brothers, fathers, supporting providers, Dr. Tucker Edmonds is just going to keep taking us through how we can show up. And the biggest message that I would say throughout this whole thing is that be part of the plan. He's going to give you some insights there. He'll talk about the toll and the like. But here's the thing, you might hear some things that might be counter to what you think or may be distracting, but this is an opportunity to get deeper. And again, my biggest piece is we do belong, right? And we're there to support mother, child, and the like. So appreciate the thumbs up for sure. Feel free to drop your notes in the chat, and whether you're going to listen to this on a podcast later or you're here in this moment now, Dr. Tucker Edmonds is going to drop some incredible knowledge, and we'll just have a conversation. So with that,
No,
let's talk about where our place is. How do we, and I don't know if you've already gone through some of the history of how we've gotten here, right? But how do we show up today? What's our true
Yes.
role? Give us some of that, help empower us or inspire us to be present.
I mean, I think that, David, I've been kind of giving some of the background. I think that like how we show up today, that's a great place for us to kind of jump off from right now. One of the things is I think that we've got to move, even though it is maternal health, and oftentimes mom is in a maternal health system. We've got to move from a mother only kind of model into a family-centered healthcare intervention. And part of that means that we are bringing dad into the equation. We're bringing dad in, we're bringing other family members in, we're bringing in, and I love the question that I saw is that we're also bringing our culture in, right? One of the things I think one of the brothers from was asking, how do you bring his Ghanaian culture and identity into the birthing process, right? And I would like to argue that when we're in this birthing process, right, as Black men and as fathers and as dads, that we are not leaving anything outside, right? The goal is to bring your whole self in, right? And in many ways, it's so funny, David, that when I was looking at some of the history of why men were not allowed to be in the labor and delivery rooms in the 60s and the 50s and the 60s, is that oftentimes doctors felt that men would faint, that men would be too nervous, that men would disrupt or get in the way of the medical procedure. So one of the reasons for excluding men was because they were afraid of, kind of how they would disrupt, right? But the data has suggested that when family show up, that it actually leads to better outcomes for mom and for baby. And so what we're saying today is it's about showing up fully and safely at the same time, right? That means bring your whole culture, bring your whole identity, bring all of your emotions there, and recognize that we are there to support mom and the baby, but the only way to support mom and the baby is for us to be fully present, right? And to be fully there. And so, one of the things I talk about, just giving an example to fellas is that, these days, when you're at the prenatal care visits, start talking to the doctor, start talking to the doula if you're working with one, start talking to the nurse practitioner if that's the person who's talking to you at some of your earlier visits about, hey, these are questions that I have about mom and the baby and me, right? So that you're always, when you're presenting it, you're narrating it as, I'm concerned about mom, I'm concerned about the baby, and I also though have some questions about who I am and how I can be when I'm in that room, right? So like kind of showing that package deal every time. Hey, this is about mom, the baby, and me, right? And so that none of those providers can forget, hey, dad is in it. For all of us to win and for all of us to be successful.
Which then sounds like we're advocates as well, not only for
Yes.
the mother, but also for ourselves in setting those ground rules a bit. And it's never too late to do it, but where should we engage?
Yes.
How early?
I think, I always tell folks that, it is ideal to very early on. And we talked a little bit about this, about, that first emotion when mom takes the pregnancy test, or when you find out and you get the phone call, you're at work or you're on your way home and someone's telling you that we're about to have a baby or the baby's coming or baby number 2 is going to be there. I think that at that moment, we have to articulate as Black dads, this is what I want or need right now. Hey, I am so excited for you. I am going to be there for you. I am going to support you and your needs during this process. And then I think it's also fair to say, and this is what I hope for as a part of. So I think we got to name this to our partners, right?
Yeah.
So, because in that moment, if you tell mom, if you tell boo, if you tell your wife, this is what I need in this process, she is also going to help advocate for you at that first prenatal care visit. Hey, dad is going to be here at all these visits. Is that okay? Are we going to let dad know when he has to leave the room? And is somebody going to go back out and let dad know when he can come back in, right?
Right.
So because mom also needs to get in here with us, right? This is not something that we can do on our own, right? Especially by virtue of how the medical care system is currently operating, right? We often defer to mom first. Especially, and it's when with Black families, we often sometimes ignore or forget dad. And so if mom knows, if very early on, you're looking your wife, your partner in the eye and saying, I want to be involved emotionally, culturally, and physically in the birth of this child and the birthing process, then she can take on with you not only protecting her interests and her needs and the baby's interests and the baby's needs, but also your interests and your needs, right? Because it can't happen, right? You can't be in the room all the time. But if mom is saying, hey, wait a minute, David's out there, I need him back in. Joseph's out there, can you make sure he comes back in as soon as he can? That makes the difference. So I think you need to start with mom is that very first place to say, if you all can come to an agreement, this is the kind of relationship and partnership that we want to have during the birthing process.
Love that. Appreciate that. I'm going to expand on that. We got a question from one of our attendees. How much work have you seen around getting elder men involved in the journey for maternal health and getting dads involved in the kids' lives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think that on a number of levels, I think that sometimes we think that if it is not the bio dad and maybe like granddad or someone else, we think that they have to wait until the end, right? They kind of maybe delayed in the process. They'll be there on the delivery day. They'll be there, kind of after baby arrives in some ways. But I would like to challenge that. And there have been some models of that, that whereas doulas who have traditionally worked with grandma, so grandma's always, grandma, we tend to think grandma's going to be there, grandma's going to be in the room, the mom of the mom. But there have been some real work that has been done to bring in grandpa, right? And to think about the elder generation, bringing them into the processes, right? And one of the things that has been most amazing, I think, is looking at the way that we can ritualize certain aspects of the birthing process, right? And
Yeah.
ritual is a fancy word to just say, let's create some kind of role or pattern that granddad or uncle or little brother or dad knows that's his job. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
and that's one of the ways that we can do it. So maybe granddad doesn't want to be in the room, but he wants to bring, he wants to pray before some stuff gets started, right? Or granddad wants to be in charge of driving you to and from each of the appointments, right? So there are ways that you can get him involved, right? Where he's there to pray with you or to drive you or to decompress afterward, right? And so I think that when we routinize or ritualize certain things, that's the way to get folks involved that may not be the traditional bio dad, may be a little bit older, may not want to be in the room the whole time, right? But we can still figure out ways to get them involved.
Okay. I definitely like that. I think another piece to that, and our audience liked it as well. Another
Yeah.
piece to that is that one of our listeners asked, what are some examples of things? So we're still in this planning participation. What are
Yes.
some things that dad may ask for in prenatal appointments? And I think this is from a mom. I have a hard time getting a doctor. I have a hard time
Yeah.
getting dads to engage in those spaces because they want mom to get all she needs first and foremost. And if I can, we put ourselves in the corner a little bit and go, okay, this is about her. And then we don't know when to engage. So first, what are some things that dad may ask for that might help to
Mm-hmm.
engage? And then how do we have that balance? And this person's a doula. So thank you.
Awesome. I love that. I'm so glad that you're here. I think one of the things that is so powerful, and I mean, and I've been spitting out some of this research, and I can share this with folks. Is I think that if we share with dad at some of those early prenatal visits, some of the methods, or not methods, I mean, some of the practices that have proven to be helpful for mom, right? So if we talk to dad and say, studies show that when dad is dealing with his mental health, that helps the birth go along a lot better. And so that
Yeah.
opens up for dad to say, oh wait, I need to be good, right? We can also talk to dad about when dad is helping and as a part of the meal planning with mom, right? Or something like that. Like that helps to facilitate some of the things. And so again, dad can begin to unpack, hey, what's my meal plan? What's my mental wellness? How can I get mentally better to support mom and to support the process, right? I think that the other thing that we need to unpack for folks is that I think that we have often thought of and externalized advocacy as about doing work for somebody else, right? And solely positioning yourself as a protector or as someone who's taking care of someone else. But I think that we've got to remind dads that the only way that you can be an effective partner for mom is if you are whole and healthy yourself, right? And so I think that we've got to normalize at those prenatal care visits asking mom how's she doing, are you dilated, what's going on, the traditional questions that we're asking. But I think that we've got to go to dad and say, how are you feeling, what emotions are you going through, how is the relationship between you and mom going right now, right? If we tell dad like communication between mom and dad is essential for a good birth, then we can start asking dad questions. How are y'all talking? How are y'all engaging, right? And then I think the number one question for dad, I think it's an easy way to get into dad, is to say, how are you preparing for the different stages that your wife is about to go through? And when we begin to have him think about the stages, maybe wife will not be able to work, maybe wife will not be able to get up the steps, maybe wife will, then he begins to think about his emotions and his needs during those stages as well. So we ask him, how are you preparing to support mom? But then we use that as an entryway to ask him how he is then preparing to support himself in those moments.
Love that. Definitely, it's planning. It's
Yes.
being able to see the roadmap of where we're going, and then being able to reflect and identify how emotionally we might feel when we get there, recognizing we don't really know what our emotion might be. Is that fair?
Exactly.
All
That's
right.
definitely fair.
So got a couple other questions coming in. So one, and Marie, if you're on, definitely text this, but is there a directory of dad doulas or Black Dad Advocacy Coalition? So anything we can do to put that into the chat, any links, we'll try to get that out. And if you want to speak to that, Dr. Tucker Edmonds, you can, but I got a follow-up question of, are there things mom can ask dad to do for mom or to look out for during the process? And you talked about the phases, the other
Yeah.
side of the conversation.
I love that. I think that, dad and mom can begin to kind of think about and unpack together what are the kinds of roles and issues that they are thinking that might emerge for them. Like, I think that one of the things that's so hard for this process, and David and I are talking about this before, is that every birthing process is different for every family, right? And so part of it is leaning into the unique nature of your family, of the culture of your community, and being honest about what and how you all operate. And one of the things I think mom can do best for dad is to say, how might things change during the birthing process, and tell him how you might need him to show up in different ways, right? So I'll give a classic example, right? In a lot of our relationships, mom is the planner, the go-getter, the logistics person in the family, and is doing a lot of things that help to organize and make sure things show up and do those. Maybe during pregnancy, or maybe during a particular stage of pregnancy, mom won't be able to do that as much, and she might need dad to show up, or dad to be engaged in different ways, right? In another way, right, mom might be much more emotional during pregnancy, and actually needs dad to be able to tap into his emotions in a deeper way in order to support her, right? And I think that if you can talk about some of those things, like what new roles or what unexpected roles am I going to ask you to play, and how can we go to people to help us develop them, right? Again, you're not doing this on an island, brothers. We don't need to figure out. So, mom might say, I need you to help with logistics. And you're like, I'm not good. So you got to build your team. Let dad build his team of other logistics. Dad might not be able to tap into his emotions just because mom is going through the hormonal changes of pregnancy. But you might then say, during pregnancy, I'm gonna hang out with my prayer partner or my therapist or someone else a little bit more often, so that I can tap into those emotions a little bit more deeply. And then the thing about the dad doulas is that, and I've heard, and there's been some research that's been begun to work on this, is that dad needs his own birth plan and his own kind of birth model. And so we got to sit down, we got to talk, we got to plan and execute in a way that says, these are some of the things that I need that may be very different from the way that we are supporting mom's plan. And we need to figure out how to name those, and then how to marry or to bring together those two plans. And sometimes that's really difficult, David, especially if mom and dad are no longer together romantically, right? We're not assuming that every time. There are great dads that show up and want to be involved, but your romantic relationship has come to an end, or maybe there never was one, really, And so that dad wants to show up and be there, but there is not the romantic relationship. So you all sometimes have to really say, let's negotiate on this front end so that we can make sure that all of this can happen, even though we don't have the natural intimacy of going home together every night, right? And talking about this, when pillow talk, when you're waking up in the middle of the night. So we have to be even more intentional under those constraints.
And all I would add is, as a child of a divorced parents, is that, and you're connected for life. Whether you have
Yes,
the intimacy, you have one great, beautiful thing in common, right?
exactly.
And so all these milestones through that child's life, the two of you should find ways to be able to come together and support under one purpose, right? The success of. So it's always connected. If you can be connected early, great. If it takes time to get there, understandable. The one thing I want to make sure that we don't forget, and you've had this thread throughout, is a little
Yep.
bit about the mental health, right? Because as
Yes.
dads, we think it's, oh, I got to carry the car seat and all these things to the hospital
Yes.
and be ready,
Yes.
right? But what we talked about before, is a little bit of dad depression,
Hmm.
anxiety of first-time child. Talk to us a little bit about that, and also creating some of those memories in the moment. And I don't
Yes.
know if we're done at the hour, and again, I apologize, but I want to make sure that our listeners and viewers get that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, one of the things is I often remind folks too that when we're talking about these plans, I want to highlight joy and and reflection, and joy and sadness at the same time, because I think that we want to create moments for dad to um find moments to take stock of the amazing accomplishments that he has been able to experience throughout the birthing process, right? So build in celebration, right? Build in, when you all are going to take pictures, build in when you're going to celebrate and think about certain things, so that's also a part of your plan, right? Your plan should not be dominated, fellas, by I'm going to do, provide, and carry this, all of this weight on my own. It should also include care for yourself. It should include rest. It should include celebration of what you've accomplished in protecting mom, taking care of yourself, and creating an entryway for baby to come into this world, right? But it is real, and that's where I wanted to get to, that 1 out of 10 men after the birth experience postpartum depression, right? So there is anxiety and fear throughout, but there's even after the birth, right? We often talk about mom's postpartum depression, right? But 1 out of 10 men experience postpartum depression, and that usually shows up with anger and control issues for men in postpartum, right? And so not be like inflexibility. So I want to let men know that after birth, and you felt like you could, oftentimes when we're on high alert, right? We are taking care of mom. We're trying to make sure the hospital system is treating mom right. And then, you want to make sure everything is in place so that baby is safe, right? Now you've done all of that, right? And you've gotten home and you have this beautiful baby girl, a beautiful baby boy, and now as you are coming down from that parts of that high alert, right? You recognize that you've not taken care of self. And then oftentimes the way that we manage that, or the way that manifests in postpartum depression for men, like I said, 1 out of 10 experience, and there's not been a lot of studies on this, right? That it manifests as hyper, sometimes anger or control or manipulation of situations. And so if mom or dad or family unit are seeing that, we need to respond. We need to say, this is okay. This is normal. This is a part of the trajectory of bringing new life, of integrating new life and into our family systems. And now we got to figure out, how are we going to adequately respond to that as a family, both for mom and for dad? Because we see a lot of times in families that when postpartum depression emerges from mom or for dad, what we tend to say is, well, you have this beautiful baby, it's just gonna work itself out, right? The beautiful baby, but we know with that beautiful baby comes sleepless nights, comes, extra expenses, comes, lack of intimacy and sometimes sex with your partner because you're now caring for this newborn baby and you're dealing with your body returning to for mom's body returning to its previous state. And so, yeah, we've got a lot of joy in that moment, but we also got a lot of things. So I want to just encourage folks, right? And I know that a lot of doulas have really engaged in this. We do a lot of prenatal visits, and then the postnatal visits often focus on the pediatric care, right? So we go from care of mom to care of baby, and dad is often left in this precarious middle zone, right, where he's never been really taken care of in any of these processes, right? Because when we go into the postnatal moment, we're taking care of baby, we're doing shots, we're asking, you're saying, have we met milestones? And so all of this requires that we be intentional about, again, like I said at the beginning, slowing down and say, at all of those visits, even at the pediatric visits, I am encouraging mom and dad and family to say, how is mom doing? How is baby doing? How is dad doing with these new responsibilities? Yeah.
Thank you for that. And just very mindful. I think that we pass up a lot of that as we're
Yeah.
navigating through the process and the like. And so, is there everybody's provided some really good questions. Any
Yes.
other questions that anybody might have that have been the result of what Dr. Tucker Edmonds has shared, or just come to mind and you say, you can send it directly to myself and I'll read it, or to both of us without naming names, but just want to make sure nothing's left untouched or said. I think I got a new message.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just so thankful for this opportunity. Thank you for, David, for birthing the magic, for the fellas and the folks that showed up for this conversation. Like, I want us to just be able to say that, like, that Black male emotion is a part of this wide birth of masculinity, of fatherhood, of the whole journey of dadhood, that you're going to have to manage this and continue to think positively about how we create these conditions so it's easier and better for the next generation.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker Edmonds. Until we meet next time, appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, all.